So he took me like this and opened my eyes. They slit his throat. Then one of them said, "Cut his head off." It was really horrendous. There is no religion under the sun which would condone that. Perhaps God will punish them.
Do you want to stop for a little bit? Okay. You want to, shall I get you some water?
Just take some water.
I'm feeling drained. It's the most overwhelming feeling I've had. And there's one critical point that you have to grasp. I'm not reporting on a case. I'm not a reporter trying to highlight the most extreme example of what has happened to Iraqis. I'm just visiting a friend. That's all this is, and I'm hearing his story. And the fact that this has happened to someone I know and love doesn't make it extraordinary. This happens to families again and again. It's just, they are tears of happiness to see you, Karim.
The family paid over £30,000 for his release. A week later, his 1.5-year-old niece was kidnapped, and they were forced to pay another £20,000. All because this fine man worked with Western journalists like myself. In Syria, in Jordan, and wherever else Iraqi refugees congregate, there are more tales of violence and tragedy resulting from 5 years of war. But the consequences of that war continue to spread far beyond the Middle East. They're also felt in towns and cities much closer to home. In 2003, British forces captured Basra in the south of Iraq. In the aftermath, they were responsible for occupying most of the vast area south of Baghdad. They had very different tactics from the Americans, and violence was nowhere near the levels of Baghdad. It's meant that British troops have been gradually withdrawn. The Irish Guards went to Iraq in 2003, and the regiment has recently returned from their second tour of duty there. Major Jonathan Palmer and Company Sergeant Major Nick Perry saw how the country had changed in the last 5 years.
I think the main difference from the sort of first time we went there to the last time we went there was the first time we were sort of fighting openly against the Iraqi army soldiers. And then the last time we went there to sort of get off a plane in Iraq and be meted by Iraqi soldiers with weapons. Obviously the first time 200 Iraqi soldiers armed and you didn't have a weapon wouldn't have been a particularly good thing.
During their recent tour of duty, the Irish Guards spent much of their time retraining the Iraqi army.
If you enter it with the right mindset, it's extraordinarily satisfying because you really feel that you're contributing in a very real way to a long-term solution.
These are battle-hardened troops, but they've struggled to deal with the loss of colleagues.
Everybody copes differently. I think, what is quite difficult is when one of the guys, is killed who you work in close proximity with, when he would often talk about his girlfriend or his mother or his father, you then realise how well you actually knew the person.
Olivia O'Connor is one of the mothers who has received the terrible news. Her son, Lance Sergeant Christopher Casey, was killed by a roadside bomb in August 2007.
Of course I'm going to be angry. My son's lost his life. The one thing I'd love to do is go to Iraq and see where my son died. And if you go on a little bit, you'll see there's Christopher there. And he was very professional in what he done. He was very, very proud of his men. He was a Lance Sergeant. He said it wasn't very nice because it was like a prison. It was barbed wire. But I was glad. I was glad it was all barbed wire. I was glad he was in being safe. Of course I'm going to be glad. I'm his mother. But no, that wasn't good enough for Christopher. He had to go out when I told him not to. Actually, the day Christopher died, when I found out he died, I got this letter. And it said, Mom, I've got a beautiful tan. He said, I look like a Greek god. He said, if you could find a ginger Greek god, that is. And that's why they put, he was my son, my God, you know.
Despite her grief, Olivia feels British troops will have to stay in Iraq for some time yet.
Just getting rid of Saddam, I mean, you've got to pick up the pieces. You can't just create a war and just walk away. But I was very, very proud that my son was chosen to teach the Iraqis how to be soldiers.
That's Chris there.
That's Christopher, yeah.
And all the comments by his...
yes, his comrades, his friends, his army buddies, and that's Chris and Kirk together. There. And they're all the men that died before Christopher.
Yeah.
There are people in the world who fought against this war. I wasn't one of them. I knew something had to be done. And I'm very proud of the boys for doing what they did. But I will be glad when the Iraqis can have their own country back and our boys are out of there. I will be glad.
The war has gone through many phases. While the attacks against coalition forces continue, the conflict has increasingly become a fight for power and territory between Shia and Sunnis, tribal disputes which are complicated by the religious divisions. One person who understands this complex landscape more than most is Canon Andrew White, the so-called vicar of Baghdad.
I can't really see anything except the sky, and all you can see is sky, palm trees, concrete barriers and trailers.
He's been in Iraq for over 10 years, and before the invasion, he warned British and American diplomats about the potential for sectarian strife.
I said that we have got to deal seriously with the religious issues, the Sunni-Shia issue predominantly. I said if we do not, we will have a massive amount of religious insurgency, terrorism and violence on our hands. And they said to me, both of them, we've got to deal with water and electricity first. Only then can we start thinking about religion. And then one of them said to me, this isn't a religious country anyway, it's very secular, so religion isn't a major issue.
Despite suffering from multiple sclerosis, Canon White works tirelessly to bring the different religious groups together, and sometimes acting as an intermediary in hostage negotiations.
And as you'll see in the car in front, they don't keep their guns inside either. It's really very high profile and very dramatic, and they will do anything to get us there. I always say to them, please don't shoot anybody on the way to church. I don't like people being shot. Terrible things happened to me, but even worse things happened to my Iraqi people. All of my colleagues, my co-workers, assistants from St. George's were on their way back from a conference in Jordan, and they were all kidnapped. And we presume killed. Most of those who disappear, we never find their bodies. In 1 year, I had 11 of my staff killed, both from the church and the Iraqi Institute of Peace, which I was running. Right, you hold that.
In a city racked by tragedy and grief, the vicar and his congregation offer a rare glimpse of optimism.
Often when things are very bad, I arrange to go and see my Iraqi people at the church, and I sit down with them and I spend time with them and I encourage them and I laugh with them and I cry with them, and that gives me hope.
But hope is a rare thing elsewhere in Baghdad. For many, the war has led to despair. On my last day, American soldiers seemed to be assembling for a patrol. But what they wanted was a memento of their war. Iraqis have been left with terrible memories of this conflict they will never escape. However each of us in the West felt about the rights and wrongs of the invasion 5 years ago, Iraq is as divisive now as it was then. In the midst of all the statistics to have emerged from this conflict, it is ordinary Iraqis who can judge the history of the last 5 years. And as the Iraqi saying goes, history has a filthy tongue.